we're trying to solve this problem. How can, when you're looking at something that's visual or listening to something, how can you prove it's real? But I grew up in Ghana and was watching Indian films.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you remember any?
Sholay.
Sholay.
Yes,
Okay.
Tangita.
Okay.
Yeah, Amita Bachchan and Dharmendra.
Yes.
The Burning Train. Everyone's talking about the future of journalism, and I actually think we should be talking about journalism per se, future, past and present. So Talk Journalism is a really good brand.
And there is one more transition that I have seen over the last few years, that now every interview is being called a podcast.
The podcast is an amalgamation of the word iPod and
Yeah.
broadcasting.
Right.
And that's why they call it podcast.
Okay.
Those with engineering degrees, and many of Indian students have come with engineering degrees, have done very well in the startups.
How do you think AI is going to change the world and journalism in particular?
AI can be seen as another component of innovation. How people take your data, use it to train their AI models. For me, I kind of foresee a way whereby tech in Ghana would have great relationships or better relationships with tech in India. If you want to do journalism, there are some days when it's going to be cold and you don't want to do it. That's the profession. It's a wonderful profession to be in. But I think in the end, there will always be a place for human intervention.
Hello everyone, welcome to yet another episode of Switch Talk, and today we are honored to have an associate professor in journalism who teaches video journalism. He has been a pioneer in that, and also how AI is shaping and changing the whole field of journalism. Professor David Dunkley Gyimah from the University of Cardiff, UK. It's an honor having you here, sir. Thank you so much for taking out time to talk to us.
Honor for me to be here, Akhil. Thank you very much for having me.
So I would like to start with your journey. How did you decide to get into journalism?
I studied chemistry and maths. And in my second year, I got introduced to radio, student radio. I fell in love with it. And so by the time I finished my degree, I wanted to do journalism. I had to do a post-grad, but it was very difficult. It was very difficult because I didn't have a humanities degree, so I wasn't used to writing. And I didn't know how it worked. So I had to really learn on the job as a student. But I did one thing that I think changed my career. I was always interested in international politics. So after I graduated my post-grad, I worked for the BBC for a while, Newsnight, had my own radio show, and also worked online TV as a reporter. But my big break, I think, came because I thought to myself, how do I elevate my career? How do I go beyond what I'm doing at the moment? And anytime you spoke to journalists at that time who were in their senior journalists, they would talk to you about Vietnam or, the big wars that were there. And I thought, well, where's the big place at the moment where there's a big story? And at that time, it was South Africa. Remember, President Nelson Mandela, who would become president, had just been released. And it was becoming obvious he would become the president. So in '92, I packed my bags.
You were in Ghana then?
No, I was in the UK. I did my degree. I did my degree in the UK. I did my GCSEs or O levels in Ghana.
Okay, and then you came for your undergrad.
Yeah, to the UK. So I packed my bags, a few things. I was able to convince BA, British Airways, to give me a free ticket to go to South Africa. They did. And I went and I had a look at the place. I stayed with people I didn't know. They looked after me. So I came back to the UK. I did one project. And I went back and I stayed for about 18 months. So I covered the townships. I did so many different stories. And that's how I fell in love with journalism. Yeah.
Great. So now, since you came to the talk journalism and you have visited here earlier as well. So I would like to start with talk journalism. What do you think about the concept as a whole, and how do you feel we can go further?
Well, I think you've done an incredible thing. I think talk journalism has become a brand. No small effort to yourself, Jamil, and the man himself, Avinash. But all of you three have done amazing with a very small team. I think at the time you called it an interesting concept, but in fact I think it's a necessary concept. And I like that you've called it talk journalism, because actually we need to talk about the issues. There were lots of conferences that I've been to that talk about the future of journalism. Everyone's talking about the future of journalism, and I actually think we should be talking about journalism per se, future, past and present. So talk journalism is a really good brand. I think you've done an enormous job bringing I say some, I think there are many more who would like to come, of the best journalists in India and from abroad around the world, who'll be able to share their expertise about where the industry is going. Yesterday's was one of the best. You've upped the scale again. And the previous ones, each time you've done something, you modified it and brought more innovation inside. So I can only think of it growing and growing to the extent where it becomes a super brand and can exist in other states, other countries.
Yes,
and
that's the plan now.
Yes, in
as
fact,
we discussed regarding Ghana as well.
Yeah. I was going to say I was advocating that it should be a kind of Ghana. I would hope at some point Ghana would be part of that setup, because I think Ghana and India share very common themes, and in terms of growth, where they're going to be in many years' time. So I think I wouldn't be so bold as to offer any advice on what you should be doing. I think you're doing that already. I look forward to more of the innovations that you've had. Yesterday's was incredible, and the lineup was incredible, and I was honored to speak at it yesterday as well.
Okay, so now coming to the profession, that is journalism, and especially, why did you choose video journalism as the specialization?
Yeah, it's a good question. I remember doing my first edit, probably in about 1991, and seeing how editing worked. But something happened. When I went to South Africa, after the elections of Nelson Mandela and the ANC, I came back to the UK, and I applied for a job from a company that was a startup. It was a newspaper company in 1994 who wanted to make TV. Because by then you only had limited channels, BBC, ITV, I think Channel 4, even I think Channel 5 I think was just about coming on. And they held an open, sort of not invitation, but application. And I thought, this is interesting, because what they were advocating was, by then, the normal stand was very similar to what we have here. There is a camera person, a sound person, even a lighting person. If you look at the videos of old TV, I say old, in the 80s, there were about 4 or 5 people involved. And this company was saying, for the first time, we're only going to have one person do everything. That was very bold, incredibly bold. So they put an advert out. I applied. 3,000 people applied for the job.
Oh, that's
3,000. 3,000. And they were only going to choose 30. So I applied from South Africa. They asked me, what do I think? And I said, in terms of interviews, they said, you've got 2 spots, one on Monday and the last one on Friday. Which one do you want? I said, I'll go for Friday. Always do the last interview so they remember you. And I went for the interview. We had a great interview. They challenged me, I challenged them, I said a few things. And then they offered me the job. And the job was fantastic, because they spent 3 months training you how to use a camera, the big ones, how to light, sound, produce, direct, and they let us go. So 24, 30 journeys, but on any given day, you'd have about 10 covering the whole of London. And we shoot about 4 stories a day of video.
That's a lot.
That's a lot, yeah. We calculated, at the end of the year, we calculated the number of stories, and the winner was a chap, I was close behind him, who had done 530 stories in a year. Sometimes 3, sometimes 4. So why did I choose it? I chose it because I think as a visual medium, it tells you what you want to see and say and hear like that. You know, in print, and also, to tell you the truth, I wasn't a great print writer then. I'm still learning, but I wasn't a great writer. And so, to me, video, and I did have a fascination with cinema. I grew up in Ghana. I've said this before to my students, they laugh. But I grew up in Ghana and was watching Indian films.
Wow.
Yeah.
Do you remember any?
Sholay.
Sholay.
Yeah,
Okay.
Sitangita.
Okay.
Yeah, Amitabh Bachchan and Dharmendra.
Yes.
The Burning Train. Yeah, so,
Wow.
and I was watching Chinese films, and I was fascinated by, so for instance, many of the, this is the revelation for many of the young people who were there, including me, at least the core, and it was only till 30 years later when I was asking them, they would say to me, we were fascinated by cinema, so when we had the camera, we thought we were making films, not journalism, but we were making journalism, but we loved the idea that we could create these films ourselves. So that was my fascination. My fascination was just interested in the visual medium, in watching TV, and also, I think, also based on what they said to us, thinking that we could do it better.
So I think you were those initial ones who could sense that this is going to get bigger, the video journalism. And today we see even the podcasts are all videos. So, and there is one more transition that I have seen over the last few years, that now every interview is being called a podcast. Would you let us know the technicalities of these terms, or if you could guide us on that?
Well, I think one string of thought, and the idea of the podcast in itself is interesting, because the podcast is an amalgamation of the word iPod and broadcasting.
Right.
And that's why they call it a podcast.
Okay.
So when the iPod came out, it was a personal thing. So the idea was therefore was personal broadcasting. So it didn't really matter whether it was audio or video, but I think people have naturally progressed to it being a broadcast now. I think I remember I did my first podcast in 2007 on Apple. It was put on Apple. But I think one of the fascinations with podcasts now is, unlike, say, traditional radio or TV, you have the flexibility and creativity to do what you want. I think that's the big difference with podcasting. So there are some very famous radio podcasts, one called The Tunnel, which is a form of cinematic radio, very immersive. And so podcasts can be anything and everything now. It's a bit like writing. I think in the 19th century, in the novel became creative from the murderer's point of view to a detective novels to all sorts of different things. And I think this is what podcasts are reflecting: personal taste, what you think works, and how your audience reacts to it. It can be personality driven, like your good self, and it can be sit-down interviews like we're doing now, or it can be adventures. So I think it's been essentially a sort of breakaway from traditional ways we've done things, where people who are, like me in 94, are clamoring to do things differently, now have the opportunity, like your good self, to do it as well.
Great. So there is one more term called vodcast now, which a few people have started using. But anyways, let's get ahead with this now. So since a lot of Indian students and their parents would be watching this, I would like you to brief them about journalism, or to study journalism in the UK. What are the best universities? You yourself have been to the Westminster, you have taught there, and then now you are in one of the best UK universities for journalism, is what I've heard, is the Cardiff. Yeah. And I think that's because you are there that people have started saying it's the best.
I joined it because I believed it to be one of the best.
Okay.
One of the best, but yes.
I would like to believe the other way around, but anyway, so what and how is the scene of studying journalism in the UK for Indian students?
How do I start this? I mean, I've had a long, great journey with it. As I say, starting back from around 2004 or 5. And I've met some incredible journalism students, including your own, Avinash, School of 2011.
And you know what?
What?
After he studied journalism from you, he left journalism.
That's a great advocate for me, isn't it? No, he was always an entrepreneur. I mean, we actually, this is a nice segue into what we did. We were teaching, I was teaching them startups, online, entrepreneurship, and video journalism. And I think some of the feedback from that period was that the doors were opening, different doors were opening to do different things, in that you didn't just have to join a TV or radio station, you could do all these other things. And I think many people like Avinash and Sharma, she's one, I can just remember different names, but many students took the opportunity. I think it's, for me, it's, what I've noticed is one of the transitions in coming to the UK, if you're an Indian or Chinese or student, there are going to be challenges, cultural challenges to start with. And I think that's something that some of them you have to bear in mind, but they overcome. I think teaching methods sometimes also can be quite difficult, because sometimes you have a preferred way of learning, and when you come to the UK, the teachers there challenge you, but don't provide you necessarily with, it's a bit like they train you how to do something, and then say, and I don't think this is different to here, I think it's just a manner, maybe some nuances, and then let you exercise those and see how you do. So sometimes with some students, they require more hands-on, and in those instances, I'm an advocate of saying, well, look, let's work together, or you work with someone, collaborate, because journalism, after all, is a collaborative medium. But no, I don't think they've done any, in fact, they fared as well as any other student. And as I said, I've seen some great trajectories of students doing incredible things. And I think one of the aspects I've also noticed is those with engineering degrees, and many of Indian students have come with engineering degrees, have done very well in the startups, going into professions like building applications, apps, and things like that. The storytelling behind what they're doing, you can have a great business, but the storytelling is a key part of that in selling the business, and learning that has been, I think, a great boon for many of the students I've ended up teaching or being associated with, yeah.
So now, coming to a major disruption, or I would say a major leap that has come. Things are changing rapidly, even more than what the internet changed in the early 2000s with the advent of AI. And since you have been teaching and, of course, doing research on AI, I would like to know from you, how do you think AI is going to change the world and journalism in particular?
How long have you got? The big question. So first, I'll give some context. In 95, if you look online, it's actually online. I remember presenting a piece by a friend of mine on TV about the internet. And we were saying the internet has arrived, this new thing. And newspapers are grappling with it. What do they do with it? And then in 2002, we had digital. 2005, I was involved in some digital platforms. I created one before YouTube. I was able to create a way where you could stream video. And I had a magazine, it won awards in the States, the Night Batten Awards. In fact, it's the 20th anniversary this year in September of winning that award. and it was
Congratulations.
the first Brit to win that American award.
Wow.
And in that competition was Newsweek, US Today, BBC, and it was just me trying my one person doing something. AI can be seen as another component of innovation in what it's doing. And at this stage, I think it's going to be a huge revelation. Let me tell you a story. In 2012, I was invited to go to Chongqing, China, to go and teach with my colleagues. And I remember walking through the airport, and I saw these steel statues, platinum statues, and one of them was these two figures on their computer. And I looked at it, it was very sci-fi, and I thought, I'm going to take a picture of this. And I did. Many years later, with my students in 2019, I showed them the picture of this, and I said, this is AI as a figure, and in 2023, you will have to ask yourself the question, or I'm asking you the question, will it take your jobs? It caused some consternation because there was some concern that, if you're joining journalism now in 2023, AI is coming after your job, what will you do? And the reasoning behind me talking about it was that we need to find new skill sets. Otherwise, we're going to be left alone. AI has a number of components now and what it's doing. First and foremost, it can be used to analyze data so people know what kind of stories work. If you think of Netflix or any of those subscription sub-channels, it knows what you're watching because of what you're clicking. Algorithms can learn from that. So that's one part of distribution. But in storytelling, it's still finding its way, but we've had a huge breakthrough in the last 2 or 3 years with Gen AI, generative AI, and that is where in the past if AI could predict what you wanted, Gen AI ends up creating something new based on what you want through your prompts. That's going to be interesting, and the talk I gave, thank you very much for inviting me, the talk I gave tried to give a scope of how you use generative AI storytelling in journalism today. It's difficult. It's difficult because the question is, what can you prove is reality and what isn't? And so at the moment, many organizations are not using AI in their filmmaking. There's a big field of something called deep fake. Deep fake is when you make an image that almost could look like you and pretend to be you. How do you verify that? So I think there's a need for tech to come up with formulas and ways where we can trust what we're looking at. Until we find ways that we're looking at, it's going to be very difficult. So part of what I've been trying to do through tech and through some associations, I did some work with the Google News Initiative in 2023, 22, I think it was. And we were some of the people who were submitting their innovations were trying to solve this problem. How can, when you're looking at something that's visual or listening to something, how can you prove it's real? Yeah. And I've been able to generate a few ideas along those lines. Yeah. So, you can, one of them is an easy one, that a video will have a link at the bottom like a kite. So if you press that kite, it should go to the person's either profile or their association and should tell you what this person has done before.
Okay, that's an interesting way of doing it.
Yes, yes. Wow. So it will link to all and it will show you a sort of Venn diagram with the people you're connected with. So you can say, okay, but if you're not in your AI, you don't have those friends and associations, then people will say, okay, but this is AI then.
But I think a lot more refining would.
Yes, a lot more refining. I think the future, what we're looking at now, and the kind of technologies that we're trying to gain now are how do we solve the problem of how AIs you can authenticate what you're looking at. I'll tell you one little story that I think, from my end, I've used AI to tell stories at conferences. I've used stories to tell, when I was in South Africa, we did the audio from those townships. I've created from memory what was going on and put them on top so people can see what I was going through. Some of them are quite scary. And I've created also biographies. So my dad, we got some pictures, we got some, we interviewed some of his old friends, and then I recreated his journey coming to UK in the 1950s with AI. And as I said, there's a link at the bottom. If people press, they'll find out who's behind it. Many organizations are not using AI, as I say, at the moment because the concern over deep fakes. But I think once we solve that problem, and also there's a huge problem also involved in how people take your data, use it to train their AI models. I think, you know, there are some countries, I think in the last 2 weeks or week, can't remember, I think it's either Sweden or Norway, that have said your face is your face. No one can use it without your permission. So I think there are hurdles to overcome, but those challenges are not unlike the challenges that we went through in, say, mid-2000. There's a great video online, if any of your younger students are watching, or mums and dads. It's called Did You Know? And it was viral in 2007. And it basically spoke about the fact that, did you know that in 2010, looking forward, there were jobs will be created that did not exist in 2004. And the same thing here. In 2025 or 2030, there will be jobs created that do not exist now. So we're just going through a pattern, a cycle of innovation. But AI's impact will be more severe, but not unlike some past phenomena. I was saying to some in my talk that if you lived in the 1920s, when the Ford Motor Company came on board, all the horse population dropped. No one wanted horses anymore. Why would you know? Because there's a car. But in 1950, the horse population went up again. Why? Because people decided that actually we quite like horses. We can use them for sports, and we like animals. So I think AI's impact will be quite similar, but I think in the end, there will always be a place for human intervention. It may not be as plentiful as it is now, but I think that will happen.
So I think the idea of verifying and coming up with some app or some technology which helps us find whether something is AI generated or real is going to be very crucial and important. So now the students who come to study from you, what is the most important advice if they want to get into journalism, if they want a profession in journalism? What is that one advice that you would give them?
I say one. I think there's many.
Okay, we can have
be
many.
Curious. Just be curious around the world. And curiosity means, therefore, that you won't take no for an answer until you find out what the answer is. And sometimes in finding out that answer, you'll be driven to do things you wouldn't normally do. And for instance, you will have to ask people questions. We don't normally go out asking people questions, you know, but if you're becoming a journalist, one of the main ways you find a story is to interview people, to find interesting people, to find the person who was at the heart of that story. I think sometimes that can be lost on those applying for jobs, because I think the end result for me is I'm going to be in TV or radio and I'm going to be giving my opinion. That there is opinion journalism, there's news journalism, there's motor journalism, there's all different types of journalism. So there's a place for many people to be. But I think importantly, be curious, be a self-starter, work with people as well, be able to work with people, have very good discipline when it comes to time and timing. Oops, I have a fly who's trying to do things with me.
We believe in coexistence.
Coexistence, yes, co-create, co-collaboration. A sense of humor, absolutely. Learn from others. learn from those who came before us, before me, before you, way back. The tradition of journalism and how it's evolved. When it comes even to storytelling, very little of what we do as storytellers is completely and utterly new. There's always something that happened in the past that will help you now. Learn those, research those, use those to amplify your story. So there are a great many attributes which are both technical, what you're going to learn, and also soft skills. You know, how do you get an interview? I had a wonderful encounter yesterday with a young woman who came up to me and said, "Hello, Dr. Gyimah, I would like to become a journalist, and I want you to do X, Y, and Z, and can you sign my..." And I said, okay. And she asked me or something, and I said to her, "Okay, that's great, but your approach is all wrong." So this young girl started asking me questions, saying, something's happening, I'm an environmentalist, I want you to do this, I want you to do that. And I went, okay, great. So your approach is, I love your tenacity and asking me, coming up to me afterwards, but for what you're wanting, your approach is all wrong. So here's my tip to you. Go and convince Avinash that he should give me my details. He should give my details to you. How are you going to do that? And she said, I'm going to go to Avinash and say, my name is blah, blah, blah. I came to this conference and I met Dr. Gyimah, and can I have his details? And I said, do you think he'll give you his details to you? And she sort of paused. And I said, right. So one of the approaches you want to adopt, what is it that Avinash has done and his team that he would really appreciate from you? He's put this conference on. How do you get his attention? And she paused and I said, right. The first thing you want to do is praise and congratulate Avinash for the thing he's done. You would now have bought 5 seconds from him. He's going to listen to you.
Yes.
Next thing you want to do...
So that's the hook.
The hook. Next thing you want to do is make reference to something you've seen and how it's impacted you. In other words, I saw Akil on stage, and what he said about becoming a journalist really made me think again. That demonstrates you've been there and you were listening. Then the third thing is how that impacts you and what it means for you. So now Avinash is thinking, because of what I've done and what you've seen, you're now interested. Now when you say what your name is and what you want, you've got his attention. And that's a soft skill of how a journalist would approach something, not necessarily all the time, but it's learning those ways. Some of journalism is about the psychology of behavior and the skill sort of how you get an interview. I've got so many stories, I can't tell them here because there's so many, but how do you get an interview from someone when they say no? I mean, you've got the interview, what questions do you ask? Open questions, that sort of thing. I don't know whether I answered the question. I think I deviated a bit. But there are many skill sets, but the one thing I would say is to be curious, be dogged, be resilient, be inspired, be passionate. If you want to do journalism, there are some days when it's going to be cold, and you don't want to do it. But that's the profession. It's a wonderful profession to be in.
Okay, so since you come from Ghana, though now you are in the UK and you've settled there, and the Indian Prime Minister recently visited Ghana as well, and we are talking about taking journalism festival there. What are the other fields, other sectors, since you have seen India closely as well? You visited here a couple of times. So what are the other collaborations or other things that both the countries can learn from each other?
Well, I think there's several. I think in business, in trade, in tech, in agriculture, they're plentiful. Your question reminds me of something I did when I'm going to use that to tell this story. In 1996, the head then of CNN Turner in Africa asked if I could take Ghana TV to South Africa to do stories, to do a kind of documentary over. And I remember the then Director General saying to me, Dr. Frimpong, Mr. Frimpong, saying, please come back with a good 1 hour program. We took a team of Ghanaians over. When we went over, I trained them to become video journalists, and we came back with 7 1-hour programs. We put them on TV, and unbeknownst to me, they had a huge impact because the people who were in there, advertising agencies, financial institutions, would later be called upon by parts of the Ghanaian government to come and present in Ghana how they did what they did. So that was a collaboration that came about because of a program between Ghana and South Africa. And using that as a template, I kind of think to myself, in many ways, given the synergies between Ghana and India and the growth patterns that are predicted by many organizations, including the IMF, in, say, 2050, 2060, Africa will have the youngest population, one of the biggest populations. Looking at sort of what GDP will be by then, looking at growth of India, China, the big kind of economies. There are synergies for how journalism, because journalism goes where often business is, where growth is. And so in 20, 30 years, if you look at the state of those economies, for me, I kind of foresee a way whereby tech in Ghana will have great relationships or better relationships with tech in India. And you look at the engineers here, how storytelling, and this I think is really interesting. Storytelling, by and large, what we practice is a model that is acultural at the top level, meaning that it's invisible, and we're doing this, we're not thinking of anything other than we're talking. But at an individual country level, there's a storytelling mode that is a theme that runs through, and there are great similarities between Ghana's way of storytelling, which is circular, which relies around religion, mysticism, which relies around their own language, proverbs, etc., and India. So I can see a situation whereby in 10, 15 years, you'll be telling stories that are very nascent and particular to your own country, that population understands. You don't have to follow. I'll give you a simple example. There's something in news called the package, the way we package a story. That was born around the 1950s between America and the UK. There are principles in France. Is there an African package? Is there an Indian package? Is there a Chinese package? They exist, but we're not using them. So in terms of storytelling, I see great synergies that will take place. In terms of tech, there's a well-known conference that takes place in Ghana called Tech in Ghana. And I see great synergies in what they're doing and what I'm seeing here and how storytelling influences that. The financial sector, fintech, if you think about how you transfer money and how you trade in money, I think that's going to be a boon as well. So, yeah, across the board, really, I think they're not too dissimilar. I think there was a reason, therefore, that your Prime Minister was there. And I think I can see a situation where we can build as individuals and entrepreneurs like yourself. And I really do look forward to having a kind of talk journalism in Ghana, which becomes a talk journalism in Africa, where you bring in these different flavors, and it becomes, like I said, its own TV network, YouTube, big channel, teaching people the ethics, the etiquette, and bringing back, realizing a journalism that it isn't based on ideologies of falsehood, and allows people to be informed, to become good citizens, because journalists are able to operate in a way that gives the kind of information that you're allowing as your podcast for people to listen to.
So that reminds me that even in the era or an age of AI and technology, communication skills are the key.
Yes, yeah.
So thank you so much, David, for being here. It was an honor having you, and the way you have talked about journalism, your journey, how AI is going to change the whole scene, the whole setup, and how students should be prepared for that. It'll be a guideline, a roadmap for students who are watching this, who want to get into journalism. So it was lovely talking to you. Thank you for being here.
And Akhil, you're a legend.
थैंक यू, थैंक यू। मैं हूं अकील खान। मिलते हैं अगले एपिसोड में एक नए मेहमान के साथ, एक नए पर्सपेक्टिव के साथ। तब तक खुद का ख्याल रखें और अपने सपनों को सीरियस लेना ना भूलें।